So, welcome everybody to this webinar about unlocking secure remote work by securing your applications using Azure Active Directory. Please note that this session will be recorded and you will be able to access the recording after the event. You can do that by just clicking the same link you used to join this webinar. There might be a delay when the recording appears after we end this event. Also, feel free to type any questions you have in the Q&A window that you should see on your right. We'll go through them at the end of this webinar. So, my name is Tom, and I work as a security consultant at Onevinn that is based in Sweden, and we specialize in Microsoft-based security solutions. I've been working with identities and security since, well, before the Millennium Bug was an issue, if you remember that. And in the recent years, I've been focusing mostly on Azure AD and all of the different security features that it offers. With me today, I have Peter from Microsoft in Germany, and he's a senior program manager in the identity division. Peter, would you like to present yourself and kick this off?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. My name is Peter Lenske, and I'm very happy to be in this webinar as well. So today we want to talk about the scenarios that Azure AD can help you in securing your applications and then enabling working remotely, which is kind of quite important these days when we look into all the Corona scenarios where a lot of customers had to send their people home and then find a way on how to secure the access to their application and resources when the users are sitting at home and no longer in the company's offices. So I'm working as a program manager in the identity division at Microsoft. So that's the some call it product group, which creates and runs Azure Active Directory. My responsibility is to be kind of the connection between big, large enterprise customers and our engineers. So to better understand what the customer needs, and then on the other hand, to explain what was the intention when we created a feature and kind of give deep dive information on how features work. And so today we want to talk about what can Azure AD do to secure your applications. And probably some of you already have Azure Active Directory. Some of you might not even know that they have Azure AD, but they have maybe Office 365, and then this is what brings Azure AD to your company as well. And the question is always, when we talk about securing those applications, when we look back in how we did IT and how did we secure our infrastructure in the past, it was basically we built a big firewall, a big perimeter around our company and our network. And for many decades, this was how we secured our assets in the IT, so that we said, okay, everybody is in the company's network, every device, every application, every user. There is no need that someone is externally. And therefore, the bigger threat occurred on the horizon. The solution for many years was just, okay, if there's a bigger threat, then maybe we should buy a bigger firewall and it will solve our problems. You might know that this kind of thinking doesn't work anymore, because if we look in how things are working today, we do have a lot of applications which are in the cloud. We do have devices which are everywhere. It might be your personal device, your work device, or maybe an unknown device. And then we do have user accounts which come from everywhere. So it could be your user account in the company. It could be maybe a B2B account from someone else, from a partner or from a customer needing to access those data. And so the problem with the old idea of how to secure those assets just didn't work anymore, because Your data is all over the place. Your users, your devices are all over the place. And focusing on the network as a security perimeter or as a security boundary just doesn't work anymore in these days. And some customers are early in this game and maybe a little bit ahead. Some customers just starting to realize these issues. If you are following kind of the industry and also Microsoft, then you might have heard about the term zero trust, where we say we don't trust any device, we don't trust any network location. A user has to always authenticate and be authorized to get access to those information. And the only way to get control over this new kind of super spreaded landscape is identity, because that's the kind of common ground where we can use as a control plane. And your on-prem Active Directory is probably not the best way to do this in the future. And that's why we want to look today into Azure AD, how Azure AD can protect your applications and your users. And once I did this kind of overview, I will hand back to Tom, and then Tom will explain how Onevinn can help you on this journey. So I'm not a big fan about numbers, and I'm not a marketing guy because I'm just a techie. And those numbers are kind of from fall last year, so they are already outdated, and the numbers are probably way higher. But just to give a rough understanding, if you have never seen those numbers before, so Microsoft runs, our identity division runs both worlds, the consumer world as well as the professional world. And combined, we do have over today it's roughly 1.5 billion identities. So that could be everything from a Xbox Live account to an Outlook.com account towards any Azure AD account. And at the moment, we do see roughly about 250 million monthly active Azure AD users. And the interesting part is that we see over 45 billion daily authentications. So 45 billion times a given user authenticates to Azure AD, which is a big number. And when it comes to, when we later talk about risk-based conditional access or machine-based learning, then those big numbers help a lot in order to get a better understanding, a better learning about which kind of pattern is a regular good user behavior and which kind of pattern is a typical attack pattern. And I mean, if your company has 100,000 users, so you're a big company, then maybe the number of authentications, maybe it's 1 million per day, maybe it's 1.5 millions per day, but then this is way less than what we see on our scale. And so seeing certain attack patterns, like for example, a password spray attack, is way easier for us on the big scale to see this than for you if you have to look on your kind of smaller scale and identify those issues in the smaller scale than the big one. That's why those numbers are quite interesting. There are some common misconceptions about Azure AD, and this is something I want to kind of clarify today. So the first one, Azure AD, that is Active Directory hosted in Azure. So that's completely not the case, because there is no domain controller in the Microsoft data center which represents Azure AD. So there are kind of over 200 microservices which are part of the identity platform. But to be honest, none of them is a domain controller. So Azure AD is not Active Directory just kind of moved to the cloud. It is something completely different. And it is a SaaS platform for an identity as a service provider. The next one, that's kind of what I hear all the time. And that's why I said in the beginning, whether you have Azure AD or not, or maybe only have Office 365. And I had a lot of customers in the past who said, no, Peter, we don't have Azure AD, but we do have Office 365. And they were quite surprised. I said, yeah, and actually then you have Azure AD as well, because the one thing doesn't work without the other thing. And that's why the misconception is, okay, Azure AD, that's the identity solution for the Microsoft apps. And frankly, in the past, this was kind of the reality, because to be honest, in kind of 10 years ago, when we created Office 365, Azure AD was created to serve as the identity provider for Office 365. That was the sole purpose 10 years ago. And this is why a lot of customers still think, okay, so we need Azure AD for the Microsoft apps, and then we need another identity provider, maybe ADFS or Ping or Okta or whatever, for all our other applications, like how do I secure Salesforce or ServiceNow? So the reality is Azure AD is a completely independent identity provider, and you can use it for any application. May it be your line of business application, your on-prem web application, which do Kerberos constraint delegation, Windows integrated auth, or it may be a SaaS application like Amazon or like, as I said, Salesforce. So Azure AD could be the identity platform for any of those applications. And that goes alongside Azure AD only works with cloud SaaS applications. That's not true. As I said, you could use Azure AD to SSO to your on-prem Kerberos applications if you want. And then the last one, you need to clean up your on-prem Active Directory before you can move to the cloud. This is not entirely true. So in most cases, we can start in a hybrid approach so that you have your on-prem system side by side with Azure AD. And then you can move scenarios and workloads piece by piece as you go. So you don't have to do a kind of big bang and kind of only I need to abandon my on-prem AD, which is not true for most of the customers today. So the question is, why should you connect your applications? So maybe you do have ServiceNow. Let's take this as one of the popular examples. And ServiceNow does. You can of course create user accounts directly in that SaaS application, and then you don't have any single sign-on. You could do a SAML integration into your on-prem ADFS or Ping Federate or whatever identity platform you have. So the question is, why should you connect those applications to Azure AD? So one thing, of course, it is productivity, because you will get single sign-on. And if you already have, for example, Office 365 for your users, that will give you just the same nice SSO experience for all the other non-Microsoft applications as you might have already for the Office apps. It also reduces a lot of the complexity in your environment, and that brings two things. Security as well as cost saving, because a less complex environment is easier to maintain. It is more secure because you see what is going on there, and of course it saves cost at the end, because, for example, if you have to run today an on-prem ADFS farm, maybe geo-redundant to have best high availability scenarios, then this can be a super complex and super costly environment. And therefore, you have to look into how you can get this done easier by just connecting the applications to Azure AD and getting all the security benefits out of this. So the interesting part is, and this is a nice chart, and as I said, the numbers are old from kind of fall last year, but it is a nice view on what are the most popular and most used third-party applications in Azure AD. And as I said earlier, ServiceNow, that's kind of the rock star when it comes to third-party apps in Azure AD. But you see all those kind of very well-known names. So a lot of companies are using those applications in Azure AD, and it just works perfectly fine. When it comes to how to integrate those applications into Azure AD, we are very keen on getting all the open standards. So unlike on-prem Active Directory, Azure AD is built on open standards. In some of those standards, we are also part of the standards committee. So, for example, the FIDO Alliance, which does all the FIDO 2 security keys and all that stuff. Microsoft is part of this this standardization body, and we kind of help define those standards and drive those standards forward. But you can see we are talking all the modern protocols. So it is quite easy to integrate applications which speak those modern protocols. And I think one thing I want to call out that is SCIM here. And that's a protocol, if you don't know, for provisioning users to applications. And that's something which I find really fascinating. When I talk to customers about app integration, most of the time it is about, okay, we need single sign-on, and we might need conditional access in Azure AD to secure the application. Customers don't much think about how do I get the user account into that ServiceNow or Salesforce application. And when I ask them, most of the time said, yeah, actually we do a manual CSV file upload. So you can do this better. So using SCIM, you can do an automated user provisioning, user update, and user removal from your SaaS application. So the moment you assign a new user to that application, SCIM will push out that user, for example, to Salesforce. It will update any attributes you're updating. And then if you delete the user from the app assignment, the user would be deleted from the application as well. So as I said, you can use this for any application. It's not necessarily a cloud application. It could be anything. It gives you access to your on-prem applications without using a VPN connection. This is something we learned a lot during the last month during the Corona crisis, that a lot of customers came to us and said, hey, our VPN infrastructure can't handle the load anymore. Microsoft, what kind of technologies do we have to publish those on-prem applications so that we don't need to rely on VPN that heavily anymore? And there are definitely scenarios you can do, and Tom will go into a little bit more detail in just a second. Of course, you need to apply some kind of identity governance, which is part of Azure AD. So which user should be assigned to which role? Is there maybe an approval workflow in order to get access to certain resources? And then, of course, there's ongoing access review capabilities so that I can say, should this user still have access to a group membership or to an application? And that, for example, can also automatically delete your guest users. So some customers are overwhelmed by how many guest users are in their tenant. The identity governance features in Azure AD can help you with those problems, and then identifying those stale user accounts and then disable and delete them if needed. I think one of the greatest things about Azure AD that is my favorite feature is conditional access. So that's kind of the centerpiece of how to authorize users for certain applications. And this is a security benefit which you can bring to all your applications. So imagine you have that good old on-prem application, which doesn't speak modern protocols, but Kerberos. Integrating with Azure App Proxy and Azure AD, you can get conditional access, you can get multi-factor authentication, you can get identity protection. So all those nice features to say, when, in which condition should a user from which device or which location should have access or not access to certain applications. So this is kind of the most used scenario in Azure AD, because conditional access, that's kind of really the main part in Azure AD to grant access or block access to certain applications. And then, of course, it brings you a lot of nice kind of reporting and management tools, which are just there out of the box, where you don't have to get maybe a third-party tool in order to get reports and stuff like this. So this is all kind of nicely done. And with this, I would like to hand back to Tom, and Tom wants to show you a little bit more on how to integrate those applications into Azure AD, and then also how Onevinn can help you in this exercise.
Right, thank you, Peter. Yes, I've been doing this for quite a few customers, moving applications to Azure AD, and I wanted to share my lessons learned from the field, how it actually works in reality, so to speak. So I have a mini agenda for my part of the presentation. The first thing is, what were the reasons for moving the applications? Why did they do this in the first place? I also have some likes from the customer. What did they appreciate about this? I want to go through the Azure AD App Proxy that Peter mentioned, how it works and what it is. And also some of the issues that we found when trying to move the applications to Azure AD and how to work around them. The first is the reasons for migrating the apps to Azure AD. And I have an asterisk here because I want to make it clear that we are not talking about moving the platform that the application is running on. We are talking about changing the identity provider of the application. So moving the application to Azure AD means that it can still be running on your server in your basement or in Azure or in another third-party cloud solution, doesn't matter. Now we're talking about the identity protection of the application. That is what we are migrating. You can, of course, move the platform as well, but that is not what is giving these benefits. So the reasons, one of the main reasons is we want to unify our identity providers. Our employees are tired of having 13 different accounts with different passwords. We want to make sure that they can use the same one. People are having old identity providers they are removing, or they want to make sure that people can reuse the ones they are having. And one of the identity provider we mustn't forget is the one that some SaaS applications provide. If you need a separate account to sign in to your SaaS application, or a third-party SaaS application, that application is an identity provider. So we're trying to remove all those spread out different accounts, basically. Another thing is, of course, the single sign-on. Some applications allow for same sign-on, which is basically to make sure that it's the same username and the same password in your application as you're used to using, but you still need to sign on. With single sign-on, once you sign into one of your SaaS application that is backed by Azure AD, you will be able to access all of the other ones without ever signing on again. Remote access to local apps. As Peter mentioned, we have an application in the basement and people are using this, but now they're working from home. So we want to give them access to this. And we don't want to open up firewalls. We don't want, the user shouldn't need to VPN into our network. Where you are isn't relevant anymore. It's more who you are, right? And multi-factor authentication. This isn't really the big ask from customers, but when we're talking about migrating applications, this often comes up and then they say, oh, good, we really want that. So that may not be the main reason, but it's a really good thing that people really like when it comes to migrating. So what did the customers most like about this process of actually migrating? Well, the first is that it was actually pretty easy to migrate most of the time again. Sometimes it just takes a few seconds, basically. You need to go to your SaaS application and say, don't use your own identity provider or any other, use Azure AD instead. So you need to set up a trust relationship. So you need to do some configuration in Azure AD. You need to do some configuration in the SaaS application, but it can go really quick. The single sign-on, again, that was one of the reasons they wanted it from the management or IT view. But it's also something that the end users really liked. The fact that they could throw away half of their usernames and password, but still access the same applications. That was a really big win with the end users. MFA also, of course, was very popular, but not only MFA yes or no. The conditional access part and the identity protection part, where we say, sure, you need MFA, but only when you're working from an untrusted computer or only when you're accessing this sensitive application and so on. So it's more of a dynamic MFA triggering, not just always. A little hidden gem here in the Azure AD is the so-called My Apps portal, where you can find all the application that you have access to through Azure AD. As you can see, I have some of the things in bold here. That means I will go deeper into them later on. The Microsoft Graph API. People were surprised how easy and great it was to actually read and write things in Azure AD. It's really easy to set up. If you, let's say you want to get the profile image for a user, so you can, when you sign into ServiceNow, you will be able to get the username as a profile picture. Really easy to do. Also, writing things is easy if you're given permission to the app. So that was a good win as well. This is a little fringe thing, but I really like it. There is a web browser plugin that you can use when you configure Azure AD to use your third-party SaaS, which means you prepare, you sign into Azure AD, you say, I want to add this application. Then you switch tab, you sign in to the third-party SaaS application. And then this plugin will remember all the settings, the metadata, the URLs from Azure AD and just type that into the configuration page. So basically it's a next finish thing, even in a third-party SaaS application. This is not something that exists for many applications, but it's a really nice feature and it's a good thing to see how this evolves over time. Another thing that people really liked is the self-service management. Azure AD has a lot of self-service management, including access to application and members of groups. That means that you as an end user can request access, and either you will get it right away, depending on what you're requesting, or you can have an approval flow where someone else needs to say yes or no to this access. That means that people don't need to call IT when they need to change who can access their application. And that's also a very popular thing to do. And the last thing is the identity governance. If you have a lot of spread out SaaS application with different identity providers, it's hard to keep track of where are they still active. If a user quits, does he still have access to third-party applications? Probably. With identity governance, you can make sure that you have a life cycle management of the user where you create it and change it and update the access and eventually remove it. I'll go a little bit deeper into that as well. Again, feel free to type questions in the Q&A if you have. Okay, there are 4 things I want to dig a little deeper into: conditional access, the My Apps portal, self-service management, and the identity governance. Conditional access, a little bit of repetition from what Peter said. Every time you sign in, there are a lot of attributes included in that sign-in. It is who you are, what kind of group membership do you have, what device are you sitting on, where are you physically in the world, what kind of application are you using. All of this are different parameters that exist for every sign-in. And all of these can be used and configure a set of rules to say that we need to manage different type of scenarios differently. We can even include risk here. And what type of decisions can we make then based on all these parameters? Well, there's different things you can do to control this. You can have the allow or block, of course. If you come from a country we don't trust, block them. If you come from a trusted device, allow it. You can also have something that is called limited access. Basically, it means you will have a read-only access to a SaaS application. Let's say I'm on my regular computer, I sign into Exchange, SharePoint, ServiceNow, and I can upload, download, do whatever I want. Then I borrow my neighbor's computer, sign in. I will only be able to read. I will be able to sign in. I will be able to edit in the web applications, but I will not be allowed to extract any information to that computer I'm sitting on. So this is a really good solution to get a read-only access to control the spread of data. You can, of course, require MFA. That's the most common one. If your user account is under risk, you can even trigger a force of password reset, which means that if Microsoft found that your account is somewhere on the dark web, that can trigger a password change by the user, and also require MFA, of course, so the bad guys can't do this. You can also use this to block legacy authentication. A lot of attacks today are using legacy authentication. Basically, it is mail, it's IMAP, it's POP, it's SMTP for now. And those old protocols aren't protected as well from such things as spray attacks, brute force attacks, and so on. So it's a really good idea to start blocking these old protocols. You can use conditional access for that. And again, this can be used to protect access to Microsoft cloud applications, third-party cloud applications, and your on-premises and web apps. I'm going to show you how the on-premises connection works later. The My Apps portal. I don't know if you've seen this. If you just go to the myapps.microsoft.com page, you will get a list of all the applications that you have access to right now. There's a lot of default applications here. So if you go there, there might seem like a lot. So there might need to be some cleanup done here. But it's a really good thing, especially when you hire new personnel. You give them an account and you say, go to the My Apps, and they will get access to all the applications that they need to do their job. It's a really good thing. And you can see it works really well on both mobile and on a computer web browser. One of the new things here is that you can actually group the application. You see you have the Microsoft and you have the All Apps, which means that you can group different applications depending on supplier or purpose and so on. So this is a really popular thing for newly employees. Another thing that was really appreciated was the self-service management. You can use groups to give access to application, or you can assign application access right away without doing the groups thing. But the self-service management looks pretty much the same. So I'm just going to show you how it looks in self-service when it comes to group. But this could equally easily be an application. So I sign into the My Apps portal and I click on the groups as the user. Here is a list of all the groups I own to the left, which I have created, or the groups I am in. You can see the groups that I have right now. If I, as the user Max, want to join a group, perhaps a group that has access to an application or something, I just click on the join group and I'm able to search for the group that I want to join. So here is the Onevinn rock band, of course, I'm going to join this one. And when I click the join group button, this group has been configured to not allow access right away. We have an approval workflow for this specific group. So I need to enter a justification here. And here it says in Swedish, I play air guitar. So this is Max's reason to join this group. And just click request. You will get an email saying that you did this request. The one who is responsible for approving this will also get an email, and he will also get a notification in his view of the groups. So he won't miss this notification. When he clicks this, he will be able to see Max has requested to join the group Onevinn Rock Band with this reason. So it's really easy for this workflow to say approve or deny. And remember, this doesn't have to be the IT department. This can be the organization itself. So this is a really popular thing as well. The next is the identity governance. How do you manage the entire life cycle of accounts? When they start, when they need access, when they change the roles, and so on and so on. So Microsoft has something that is basically a group of products that they call identity governance, which is the entitlement management, the access reviews, privileged identity management, and terms of use. And I could spend an hour on each of these, but just shortly describe what each of them do. The entitlement management means that you can bundle access into a package. That means that you can have, let's say, oh, I have a factory floor worker, or I have a student, or I have the PR firm that I'm working with. They can have a bundle access that gives them access to applications, to SharePoint sites, members of groups and so on. So people can request that, or you can give that bundle away. Here you can also have workflows where you can approve or not approve. You can even delegate the approval to your partner organizations and so on. It's really flexible. And in that is also built in the access review, which you also can use separately from entitlement management. And an access review is just what it sounds. We're going to review who has access to stuff. And you can do this at one time, and you can do it towards a group membership or an application assignment or similar things. And you can also do it scheduled, which means that, okay, let's say every quarter, I want to make sure that all our guest accounts still need to justify their access to our tenant. There's a lot of different usage for this access review. And you can always either just get the report back of how the users answered and take decision, or you can actually automate the decision. If a user say, no, I don't need this admin role anymore, you can just remove it automatically without any user interference. The privileged identity management is basically just-in-time administration. You can be given an admin role, but it's not activated. Let's say, oh, you're a SharePoint admin. Now you're an eligible SharePoint admin, which means that you have the right to elevate your account to SharePoint admin. That may require MFA to be secure. And you can have that for a couple of hours. It's configurable. When you do things you need to do, and then that permission will go away. So there won't be any stale or standing admin permission. You always need to actually activate these permissions. And that's a really good security thing. If your account is leaked during the weekend, the bad guy can't do any harm, for instance. This works for Azure AD admin roles, and it also works for access to Azure resources. I want to have access to this storage blob and this virtual machine for 2 weeks, for instance. That is something you can do with PIM. And the last one, terms of use. Using conditional access, you can, in certain scenarios, insert a terms of use, basically a PDF that the user needs to press OK on before they will get access to the information they're trying to access. This is good for GDPR. By clicking OK here, approving this, you accept that we store your information and so on. It can also be used for education. If it's the first time you access a new SaaS application, you can present a PDF basically with a user guide saying, here are the shortcuts, here's how you get help and so on. So it doesn't have to be terms of use. It can actually be instruction manuals as well. What about local systems again? If you have an on-premise network and you have internal web-based applications, like an HR system or an intranet or something like that, and the people are working from home outside of your on-premises network, how do you give access to this? Well, you can give access through the firewall, either directly publish the application or using a VPN to get in or something like that. But we don't want to do that. Why do we want to open up things into our company? What we can do is we can activate the service in Azure AD that is called Application Proxy. This comes with something that is called a connector, which is an application you install inside your internal network. And this is just an agent you can install on a Windows server or even a Windows client if you would like. This connector sets up a secure tunnel to Azure AD outbound. There's still no inbound traffic coming in here. So when the user then tries to access, you need to use DNS to point the URL to Azure AD instead of your own network here. Then Azure AD will relay the request of the web page through the secure tunnel and get it back to the client. So without changing the internal application at all, we enabled secure access from the outside. And not just access. Since you are using Azure AD to sign into this application, we can enforce MFA. We can enforce conditional access. We can even protect ourselves from a denial of service attack. If someone tries to force this web page to go down, that's Microsoft's problem. That's not your problem anymore. You can still access your application on premises. So this is a really good solution. And as Peter mentioned, you can open this access straight away if you have a, I don't know, a lunch menu or a PKI CRL file that anyone should need to access. You can publish it without any type of sign-in pass-through. You can also enable sign-in pre-authentication, which means that you need to sign in to Azure AD to be able to access through the connector. And you don't need to have authentication on your internet site. So you can say, okay, this group will be able to access this way, and other people will not be able to access it. But again, the local web page doesn't have to be changed. The authorization authentication happens before that. If that local web page is using Kerberos, then you can actually make the connector convert the Azure AD token to a Kerberos ticket, which means that you can get single sign-on to your AD integrated application. Again, without changing the application at all. I think that's pretty amazing. How about issues then? Were there any issues when we were implementing or trying to migrate the applications? Yeah, there were some issues. One of them was that the attributes were not in Azure AD. And I'm talking about custom attributes that some of the applications were using. They were getting things in the token from the old identity provider, like a dealer code, area code, manager's dog, I don't know, different kinds of attributes that may not exist in Azure AD. And there's different ways to solve this. You can actually populate your Azure AD with these attributes. You have custom attributes that you can populate either in the local AD and then sync them up through the Azure AD Connect or directly in Azure AD. There's a limited set of custom attributes though, so that's not something you should just run into. You should think about that. Another way is to, instead of supplying these attributes in the token to the application, you can get the application to look up this information instead by using API requests to any attribute store, really. And a third option that actually seemed to work is we'll skip those attributes. A lot of attributes were sent just in case, and it turned out the application didn't actually use those attributes for anything important. So a lot of attributes we just stopped sending, and the application still worked as intended. Another issue is not all SaaS apps support this. You can't go to all the SaaS apps and say, I want to change the identity provider for this application to my own Azure AD. We even saw some examples where, yes, they could, but that required a premium license. So it cost more money to be able to change the identity provider of that SaaS application. So here we need to decide, should we not migrate it? Should we keep it as it is? Or should we pay extra money? Or should we perhaps change SaaS provider for this purpose? And the last one, which is a bit tricky. If you have created local accounts for your partners or guests, and they use that to access your application, all of a sudden you move your application up to Azure AD, and you also sync those locally created accounts to Azure AD for your partners to be able to sign in. That works great. But what happens if that user is also using Azure AD in his home tenant on his computer, another tenant? Then he will get automatically signed into his own tenant. When he tries to access SaaS application and want to sign in with your account that you have created for him, he will have a hard time signing out and using that because he will always get automatically signed in with his own account. So it's unintended single sign-on basically. There's ways around this as well. Usually it's the ADFS that do the automatically sign in. So by not being on the local corporate network, it can solve it. Using a specific web browser that doesn't support this single sign-on, that can also solve it. But it's a bit tricky. There is a new thing that is coming up. I'll show you in a few slides where you actually can convert your local accounts to B2B. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. I'll talk about that now. There is a lot of things happening in Azure AD. Every week or at least month, there's a lot of new things happening. New features, improved features, and so on. It's a lot of things to keep up with. So if you looked at Azure AD for a year ago, look what happened, because a lot of things are happening. And I just picked 3 of the latest news that I think are most interesting. The first one is that you can invite internal users to B2B collaboration. What this means is that if you have created local accounts and you sync them to Azure AD and people were signing into those, you can now convert those. So people will sign in with their home tenant account instead. The account will stay the same. It will have the same object ID. It will have the same access. It will be the same object in your tenant. But the attribute that says, where do I go to authenticate this, will change from your current Azure AD or ADFS to the user's home tenant instead. And this saves a lot of problems. We worked a lot with this issue, where how do we convert a user that we were responsible for into something that they are responsible for? This means you don't need to manage the password resets anymore. If that guy quits his job, his account is deleted in that home tenant, he will no longer have access to your stuff. So there's a lot of good things by doing this. Still in preview though, but it's really interesting. They just the other day released that Azure AD, usually you can only configure single sign-on to third-party application for up to 10 applications, I think it was in the free version. Now they say, no, you can do it for any number of applications that you want. Even if you have Azure AD free, which doesn't cost a cent, you can still use single sign-on to third-party cloud apps at no extra cost. Using security features such as conditional access or the identity protection, that will still incur license costs, but you can still enable single sign-on at least for any tenant. Another thing is a really interesting feature, continuous access evaluation. Today, when you sign in, simplifying it, you're going to get an identity token from Azure AD saying, this is you. You can use that identity token to request access tokens, which basically is a ticket to a specific system. So I sign in and I go to SharePoint. I need to have a SharePoint access token, and I will get that using my identity token. And that access token is by default valid for 1 hour and it cannot be revoked. The identity token can be revoked because when you try to sign in again, Azure AD can say, no, sorry, your account has been disabled. But the access token up until now has been unable to revoke, which means that if you delete an account, he can still have access to stuff for exactly an hour or less. This is going to change with continuous access evaluation, where the client and Azure AD will talk to each other and update each other about things that's going to happen. So that if there's a risk on your account, Azure AD can tell the client application, oh, this user needs to do MFA now, even if it has an access token, or if you change the network or something else like that. So the conditional access can trigger anytime something happens, which means that the access token can be valid longer. So you can have an access token that is valid for 12 or 24 hours, because if something happens that risks that access token, it's going to be reevaluated. This requires change on the service side and on the client side, unfortunately. It has been implemented in Outlook. Your Outlook probably already has this built in, and it's going to be enabled on Exchange and Teams and perhaps SharePoint. Peter, you can correct me. So this is really interesting future where the access is going to be more dynamically real-time evaluated all the time. If you want to get started with this, how do you do that? Well, we at Onevinn, together with Microsoft, we're offering a workshop that we can have with you about app migration. This workshop is about half a day, where we talk about different things. We will talk about the benefit of migrating apps, basically repeating this and go deeper into the details about why you want to migrate applications. We want to help you plan this in different phases. Basically, find out all your applications. Usually there's more than you think of, and try to scope which applications do we talk about first and so on. Then we classify the apps. Should we leave them as they are? Should we migrate them? Should we change them? Depending on how commonly used they are, depending on what the lifetime of the application is considered to be in your organization. And we can help you start a plan and test of this. Again, in a half day, we won't be able to migrate any applications, but we'll help you get a plan and get started, so you know all the different phases and what you should start looking at. there might be funding from Microsoft for this. You can contact either our people in Olof or Christopher or Peter or me, and we can look if you're eligible for that funding. But it's 4 days, sorry, 4 hours. So this is a really interesting way to get started. You don't have to migrate, but this will get you a tool to see if you want to get started with migrating. I see I have a little time left. I think I will go through the authorization as well. I thought I wouldn't have time for that. This is a really common question. Sure, I can sign in people using Azure AD and they can come to my application. But if I want to have different authorization, not who they are, but what are they allowed to do when they sign in? There are different ways that Azure AD can help with this. The scenario is that you have the Azure AD, the identity provider, and you have your application that has Azure AD as their identity provider. And there is a federation configure, so they trust each other. And in this scenario, we assume that the user is authenticated. He's allowed to sign in. He had the right password and username and so on. Then we can look at the coarse-grained authorization. The first scenario is every user in your tenant can sign in. And signing in means basically going to Azure AD, signing in, getting an access token, and sending the access token to the application. This can enable all your users to sign in, which is good for intranets and so on. You can have assigned users as well, which basically means only those people that I assign to this application is allowed to sign in. You can assign users or groups. And if you're assigned, there's the same scenario as the one above. If you're not assigned, you will basically be stopped by Azure AD and saying, sorry, you're not allowed to access this application. And that login request will never even hit your application because Azure AD says, sorry, you're not assigned. Also, that application will not show up in the My Apps portal if you're not assigned in this scenario. But maybe this isn't enough. You maybe want to have a more fine-grained authorization. What you can do then is that you can assign users, but also with a specific role. And that is an application-specific role. So let's say John here is the Salesforce admin, while Megan, she's a Salesforce auditor, and I am the Salesforce, I don't know, regular user. So you can have different roles when you assign the access to the application. And as you can see, the token here suddenly changed. It includes the regular stuff, but it also includes a claim that is your role. That means that the application can then consume that token and look at the claim and say, oh, he's an admin. I'll treat him as an admin user in my system. And this configuration, as I said, is included in the application configuration. If you want to, you can also assign and using groups as role. I can create an Azure AD group saying he's a Salesforce admin, another group saying this is Salesforce users. And then I assign the roles. Sorry, I just assign them and then I send on the groups in the token. So the application needs to look at, okay, these are the groups that this user is a member of. I need to do the authorization based on that. The thing with this is that the groups are tenant-wide. Everyone will see these groups. The role that you create in the previous scenario, those are contained within that application configuration only. Previously, the token could only contain 150 groups, the SID of the groups, object IDs. If it was a bigger group membership for that user, they needed to look this up using the Graph API. This has changed. You are able now to configure to only send a specific subset of groups. Beforehand, this was a problem that the application needed to actually, if you were a member of more than 150 groups, it would just contain no groups and a link to where you should go to look up the groups. And of course, the application itself can also keep track of authorization. You can use the all users can sign in and then the application can keep track of who's what. So these are the authorization options that is built into Azure AD that has helped a lot of people in modernizing authorization. For me, I hope you had interesting time and learned something new, and that you're feeling inspired to look at how you can migrate your application to get all these security features that are built into Azure AD. There is a survey. I really appreciate if you fill it in. It's just 3 multiple choice questions. Shouldn't take that long to fill in. Really appreciate it. Peter, do you have any other closing words, or did we have any Q&As that we should go through?
No, we didn't have any questions in the Q&A. So thank you very much also from my side for everybody to attend this webinar. If you have questions, please reach out to the Onevinn folks, and they are happy to help you with your app migrations. Yeah, hope to see you soon in one of those webinars, and take care with all your Azure AD applications.
Sounds great. And keep safe, wash your hands, and keep learning.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.